this are well known. We should not be ignorant of its impact on both children and adults. We recognize that all body parts are not equal. We protect and cover some differently than others. Paul appeals to this natural understanding as he writes in 1 Corinthians, and the parts we regard as less honorable are those we clothe with greatest care. So we carefully protect those parts that should not be seen. Nakedness was natural in the beginning. God created Adam and Eve, and they were naked in the garden. It was only after their sin and disobedience against God that nakedness became dishonorable. Suddenly, Adam and Eve were naked and afraid, but God made a covering for them. While we live in this world full of sin, this is why we cover our nakedness. We just celebrated Easter this weekend, when Christ came to die on the cross to pay the penalty for our sins, and he was resurrected on the third day. Through these events, Christ covered our sinfulness before God and reconciled us to him. And this is the gospel, that we can't be perfect, we can't do everything, and to reconcile us before God. And until Christ returns, this is the persistent state of things that many seek to suppress. So I urge you to think this through for our protection and operation of our community. Thank you.
We have a couple of things back there, so hopefully I can figure these ways we're getting at.
Don't you love to discuss this? I just want to say, you're going to be discussing the long-term facilities plan. And I just have a question for you. We're discussing the long-term facilities plan later this evening, and I want to thank you. It's been a long journey, but I hope that the resolution is worth the effort. Thank you very much for your time on it.
Okay, anyone else? Well, if it works, you should be just behind it, but we'll try it.
That's a tough act to follow. My name is Austin Morris. I live at 757 East 8th Street in Pella, and I am here to address the council regarding the proposed indecent exposure ordinance. I don't want to run over time, so I'm just going to get right to it. This ordinance, at a minimum, needs significant written clarification. I have immediate concerns regarding the legality, implementation, and enforcement of the ordinance. Paraphrase Councilwoman's Floor in the last council meeting, how do we define violence? Do we define it as anything between the gluteal fold and the sacroiliac joint? Should we narrow it down to the interior, the iliac crest, maybe even greater trochanter, lateral to the sacrum, so that we can accommodate it in a swimsuit? Dr. Carlstone, did I get that right?
Great words.
Should we just define it as a percentage of total surface area and then ask our police to measure before issuing a ticket? This ordinance is in response to what some have described as the topless teenage girl in the pool last summer. Chapter 216 of the Iowa Code, the Iowa Civil Rights Act, way back in 1965, defined gender identity as a gender-related identity of a person, regardless of the person's assigned sex of birth. Lost my spot on the button speaker. Regardless of the person's assigned sex of birth, so we are referring to a trans boy. Like it or not, a male of a protected class under Iowa law. To write an ordinance in response to the topless girl at the pool when referring to a trans boy would appear to be illegal under Iowa law. I'm not an attorney, but it seems the intent of the Iowa legislature was to protect individuals against exactly this kind of discrimination. Councilwoman Branderhorst stated the Iowa law has some loopholes that need to be closed. This isn't a loophole. This is actual codified protection under the law. Even if we do choose to completely ignore existing Iowa law, couldn't a trans woman, as some of you refer to them as a biological male, walk freely through the square in the middle of tulip time wearing nothing but a pair of Daisy Dukes? That may sound hyperbolic, but do we really think that no one will force the issue into way? This entire issue was whipped up by Jacob, a hack journalist in Sioux Center, trying to drive traffic to his clickbait masquerading as news website, the Iowa Standard, for the purpose of generating advertising. This community is allowing itself to be manipulated by an outside entity, literally a guy in northwest Iowa trying to make a buck. risk alienating the most vulnerable people in our community. And we, as a community, really want to spend tax dollars, as well as potentially being made laughingstock for the national news media, enforcing an ordinance against a non-issue created for the sole purpose of profiting. I don't think so. I don't think it's a responsible use of community resources, and I don't think it's the intent of this community or this council. I do want to thank you all for your leadership, and thank you for the time to speak.
Anyone else?
Chief Oxbergen, 224 South Street. I want everybody to reflect a minute on the mural in the post office. Last week, people of this city and the Lord expressed their will over some decisions that were made. It was by more than double the amount required that the will of citizens was expressed. So tonight, I would like to ask the Lord's will for the decisions that you guys will make tonight. I'll get a page turn here. I'm going to use up my 3 minutes to page turn. So would you like to join me in the Lord's Prayer? Our Father, who art in heaven, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us of our sins, and forgive us that we sin against. Forgive those that we sin against. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil forces. Amen.
Anyone else? Okay, moving on, I'll entertain a motion for approval of the consent agenda. Brian Hort,
Support.
4. Any discussion?
I would like to talk a little bit about the P and Z minutes of February 28th for just a little bit. Two things that kind of struck me on that. One was regarding the discussion over Timberview, which was on a 3-4 vote that it passed just by 1. I don't ever want to take anything away from our commission members who work there for no pay and do that, but there are some comments made in there that I wonder are tripping over into personal opinions rather than what really the goal of the PMZ is supposed to do, which I think is just to see if they are meeting codes and meeting the comprehensive plans. And I guess, one comment I saw that regarding against that the influx of housing may oversaturate the market. Well, does anybody think that those houses will oversaturate the market? I mean, and then I don't think a person thinks that, and that's being portrayed as a fact there. And then secondly, about the affordable housing, well, that's the best way to get affordable housing is to oversaturate the market. So I just am not sure that I just wonder if there should be a review of the P&Z, what their role is, and whether, I know personal opinions come into that, but their main goal, I don't think, is to make those kind of comments and to address the issues in that way. I just think those are totally inaccurate perceptions that are being passed about. And we don't, just because of timing, we don't get that to look at when we vote on those things, which is a little bit unfortunate, but that's just the way it is. But I do think after the fact that we need to maybe take a look and see what the P&Z is being advised to do and what they know their role is on their direction. So that was one thing. The other thing concerns the Chick-fil-A, where there was an abstention on that with no reason. And everything that I can see was because the P&Z member did not like it that the owners of Chick-fil-A were against the Equality Act, which I don't know what it is, I didn't look at. But I just don't think that there should be abstentions without a legal reason, because I think that has to be, is that correct, Mike?
Yes.
So so no legal reason was given, and if a person is not able to do that, I'm not so sure if a P&Z position is the right position for him. So, I'm gonna vote for it. I thought about pulling it out to have a separate discussion, but I just wanted to bring that up as we have more developments here, that this be, maybe something to do a high-level review of.
Okay, thanks, Calvin. Mike, I'm sure you'll take what he said.
Point taken. Point taken. It is also important to note that on a biannual basis, we try to schedule trainings with the Planning and Zoning Commission as well. So, point taken, and we'll keep that in mind for future training sessions with the commission.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anything else? All right, so we're gonna vote on the motion for approval. All in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Mandy, please call the roll.
Branderhorst.
Yes.
Sporer.
Yes.
DeYoung.
Yes.
Banstra.
Yes.
Carlstone.
Yes.
Hopkins.
Motion passed. Okay, moving on, resolution number 6425, entitled Resolution Approving Preliminary Plat for Bingham Subdivision Plat 1. This, do you recall this resolution was tabled at the April 5 council meeting? Mike?
Hi, yes, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to refer everyone's attention to the big board for those following at home. I'm on slide number 3 tonight. And as Mayor Ward stated, this item is currently on the table, proposed preliminary plat that Mr. Jeff implemented. Staff is recommending that this item remain on the table. The reason is the Planning and Zoning Commission is scheduled to review the preliminary plat on April 25th. And this item will be back in front of the City Council after the P&Z review, which will be on May 1st. So our recommendation is to maintain this item on the table, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Anybody want to do anything different?
Is this hardship on your schedule, Jeff?
Well, definitely a hardship, but I think it's the only solution.
Okay. So council agrees, we'll review it on May 3.
Do you need a motion to table that?
I believe it just stays on the table.
It does?
Yeah, it remains on the table unless the motion's made to remove it.
All right, moving on, resolution number 6428, entitled Resolution Approving Change Order number 5 with WRH Inc. for the wastewater treatment plant 2019 upgrades.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'd be happy to explain this item. As Mayor Ward stated, we're considering a change order for the improvements to the wastewater treatment plant this evening. Change order number 5 that we are considering this evening is just over $1,500 and for minor items to the plant. And as council is well aware, the overall contract for the wastewater treatment plant started off with about $6 million. The improvements that we are talking about that we've done tonight are actually intended to be in treatment needs for the wastewater treatment plant for the next 20 years. So it was a long-term facility plan. In addition, they are also designed to meet the new treatment design standards, the treatment standards required by the Iowa Department of Natural Resources. So the change order that we are considering this evening is for just $1,606. The council were to approve this change order, we'd be left with a revised construction contract of $6,056,817.91. And staff is recommending approval of the change order this evening, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mike. Can I get a motion for approval?
So moved.
Support. Young, Hopkins, discussion? Okay, all in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Mandy, please call the roll.
DeYoung.
Yes.
Hopkins.
Yes.
Sporer.
Yes.
Branderhorst.
Yes.
Banstra.
Yes.
Carlstone.
Yes.
Motion passed. Resolution number 6430, entitled Resolution Approving Construction Contract Bond for Furnishing of 15 kV medium voltage power cable. Oh, wait, I skipped one. Sorry. Going back. Resolution number 6429, entitled Resolution Approving Airport Engineering Service Agreement for the apron expansion of Pella Municipal Area.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, like as Mayor Ward stated, we are considering this resolution an engineering contract regarding this associated. Now, in explaining this item, it may be helpful for those in attendance, because council is well aware when we considered the city's recent budget process, when we were talking about the upcoming budget year in 2023. At that time, we stated because of delays associated with the regional airport, there was improvements to the Pella Regional Airport that we may have to consider in the future. This was one of the items that we were referring to during the budget deliberation. What this engineering contract would be an expansion of the apron at the Pella Municipal Airport. Just to orientate viewers in the audience, some time, specifically with the concern of parking jets at the airport. And this has been an improvement that's also been recommended or requested by the Pella Airport Committee. In addition, this improvement that we are considering this evening has also been requested or recommended by our large corporate partners within the community, namely Pella Corporation and Premier Corporation as well. So with this, Mr. Mayor, what's being proposed with this engineering contract, total fees for the engineering agreement are $65,900. The estimated cost for the base bid construction project right here, so this would be the 100 by 530 right here on it, it's $576,000. Council board approved this resolution, and engineering and services agreement project will be ready for bid within 75 days on that as well. So with that, Mr. Mayor, once again, just to re-summarize, this project is heavy traffic at the Pella Municipal Airport. It's also associated with delays associated with the regional airport as well. Improvement has been requested by both Pella Corporation and Premier Corporation as well as the Pella Airport Committee. So with that, we'd be more than happy to explain this item, or the council will address any kind of questions that the mayor and council may have on this item.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Can I get a motion for approval? Manager Hopkins, discussion.
Did Garden Associates give a time frame when they thought the agreement, the engineering work would be done? This is a busy time of year, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's my understanding, Denny, correct me if I'm wrong, but the council order approved this engineering, the project to be ready for bid within 75 days, correct?
Yeah, they believe that's fair enough. It's pretty straightforward. It's one great big large slab, tipped one direction, drain off the south end.
So the $65,900 includes the alternate bid?
Yes.
Yes.
They actually, the original number didn't include that. They've agreed that it's okay. They're comfortable with their number not to exceed based on hourly rates. So they held 65.
Because it's important that we get that also.
Yes.
So we can consider that. Anything else? All right. All in favor of the motion, please say yes. Opposed, no. May please call the roll.
Banstra?
Yes.
Hopkins?
Yes.
Spore?
Yes.
DeYoung?
Yes.
Branderhorst?
Yes.
Carlstone?
Yes.
Motion passed. Now to resolution 6430, I'm trying to skip over 29. Entitled Resolution Approving Construction Contract and Bond for the Furnishing of 15 kV Medium Voltage Power Cable.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, for those following at home, I'm on slide number 6 this evening, as Mayor awards today with this resolution to do actually approve a contract with Wesco Distribution for materials purchases for a 15 kV medium voltage power cable. Now, it was important to note on April 5th, Council did award this contract to Wesco, so we awarded the bids on the lowest responsible bidder, which was Wesco on April 5th. Tonight, what we're considering with this resolution is the actual approval of the construction contract along with the performance bond for the project. Now, the amount of the contracts and the amount of the materials is at $256,851.98. It is important to note that this is a materials only project bid or contract amount that we are considering tonight. As Mayor DeWard stated, from a reliability standpoint, it is an important project for the electric utilities. Our staff will be installing the cable that we are considering this evening. And we do have a description of the project up on the big board, but in essence, what this project would do would be replacing a 1960s stereo cable with a modern cable system in our distribution system. So it's an important reliability project that we are considering this evening. Now, it is important to note that the city attorney has reviewed the contract and staff is recommending approval tonight. So with that, Mr. Mayor, I'm more than happy to answer any questions the mayor and council may have on this item.
All right, thank you, Mike. Can I get a motion for approval? Young, Hopkins, discussion? Okay, all in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Mandy, please call the roll.
DeYoung?
Yes.
Hopkins?
Yes.
Spore?
Yes.
Branderhorst?
Yes.
Banstra?
Yes.
Carlstone?
Yes.
Motion passed. Moving on, resolution number 6431, entitled Resolution Approving a Technical Services Agreement with Newcon Technologies to provide engineering services for the Pella Indianola Fiber Transport Network project. Right?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'd be happy to explain this item, and I'd like to refer everyone's attention to the big board for a brief presentation on this item. As Mayor DeWard stated, what this resolution will do is approve a technical services agreement with Newcon Telecom Technologies for the design of a transport network that will connect our utility with Indianola municipal utilities. So if you hear the acronym IMU, you're talking about the Indianola utility side of things as well. Now, as we stated, what this project is intended to do is connect the transport line between your two utilities. And it's an important reliability project for the city of Pella. As background on this, our system that we have, Pella Fiber, includes roughly 70 miles of fiber optic lines throughout our community. We own another transport line that goes to Grinnell, currently connected to our internet service provider. What this project would do is actually provide that second connection point in Indianola municipal utilities. Indianola has a connection to downtown Des Moines with that, so we have two connection points to our internet service provider for both utilities on this. And the great thing with this project is we'd be able to share the cost of this project. Currently, we are leasing a second transport line just purely for backup purposes. If council were to proceed with this project, with that, we would no longer need to lease the backup transport line onto the project. So with this agreement that we're considering tonight, Newcom is the same engineering firm that designed the fiber optic network within our community. They also designed the Grinnell to Pella to Grinnell transport line that we currently own as well. And as further background on this, on March 15th of this year, we did an improvement agreement with IMU for this project, and it's a shared cost project. And under the terms of our contract with IMU for this project, the costs are split evenly 50-50 on this. And so, projected project costs that we have associated, including the cost of this engineering agreement, will split evenly with Indianola municipal utility as well. So let's go ahead, please, Mandy. Now, what we have listed up on the board is just a high-level overview of the proposed engineering contract. And as you can see, when we talk about the engineering for the project, it's roughly a $462,000 contract. Our share of that would be approximately $231,000 that we're considering this evening. Now, as far as the overall project cost, as far as the estimate that we have, that connection line between Indianola and Pella, which also includes the engineering for the project, is roughly $2.8 million. Now, from the financing standpoint, we've always planned to have the second line installed, so we'll be using the bond proceeds that we had with the original issue of Pella Fiber to pay for our share of the project. So with that, Mr. Mayor, staff is recommending approval of this agreement for the agreement with Newcom to provide the fiber optic network or transport line that will connect us to the Indianola system and ultimately to downtown Des Moines. And with that, we'd be more than happy to answer any questions the mayor and council may have on this item.
Thank you, Mike. Can I get a motion for approval?
So moved.
Brandon Horst Hopkins, discussion, questions?
Are these engineering fees running higher than Pella to Grinnell? It strikes me as quite high.
No, it's the same, actually, it's the same cost for linear equipment. The engineering fees that we're considering this evening is roughly the same cost for linear equipment that they had with the original fiber optic system that they had on it. The reason why it's higher than we're considering the one that was to Grinnell was this line is approximately 44 miles, so it's 10 miles greater distance than the Grinnell line was.
What are we paying now for the monthly backup?
We're paying approximately $5,500 a month for the for backup. It's important to note when we talk about backup on that, that's for roughly 10 gig of backup. So as the city's load, I call it the load, I'm used to electrical terms. This is our customers increase and the bandwidth needs for fiber and total fiber increase on a backup basis. That number will also increase as well as the next logical block, roughly 20 gig bandwidth backup. And so those costs will be proportional to the amount of gig that's required for the system.
Have we had to use the backup?
That would be a question for Joy. The question was, have we had to use the Grinnell backup, or the backup that we currently have for the fiber optic?
Yes, we have used it on 2 occasions, but nobody knew it.
So it's worked flawlessly.
It's worked flawlessly.
Anything else? All right, we'll vote on the motion. All in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Mandy, please call the roll.
Branderhorst.
Yes.
Hopkins.
Yes.
Spore.
Yes.
DeYoung.
Yes.
Vanstra.
Yes.
Carlstone.
Yes. Moving on to abstract bills numbers 2101. Can I get a motion for approval?
Move to approve and issue warrants.
Brandon Horst, DeYoung, any questions, discussion? All right, all in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Mandy, please call the roll.
Branderhorst.
Yes.
DeYoung.
Yes.
Banstra.
Yes.
Carlstone.
Yes.
Hopkins. Spore.
Motion passed. Anybody in council have any other business we need to address tonight before we get into our policy and planning?
I just got one thing, I don't know if you call it business or not, but I was, this is kind of a fun thing to do. I was visiting with Mark Wiskus today, and I don't know, I've got a copy for everybody. This is the National Kiwanis magazine for March, and they're 100% of their feature, let's see about them, was devoted to Pella, on the Wonderspelen. And just an outstanding article about Pella. This was in their March issue, so pass these down. And then if that wasn't enough, in their April issue that came out, that Sarah Turnbull was featured in that issue and told all about her life with her special needs daughter and how Wonderspelen has done that. Mark said that they are getting calls from all over the country for people, how did Pella do this? And the March edition tells how the step-by-step process they went, so they're getting calls how to do that. Kiwanis is still continuing to raise money. The money is still pouring in, so and they have other things they plan to do with Wonderspelen. So I think, when we see a community that might be divided on some issues, and I don't profess to know all the Lord's will like maybe some folks do, but when I look at this and see this good thing happening in this community, that makes me proud to be part of Pella and what's going on. So
Well, thank you. It's a lot of neat stuff.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
This is national.
Look forward to reading the article. Yes. Anybody have anything else? All right, any member of the public have any other business that needs to be addressed? Anything else? If so, the rules don't change. Come up, state your name, address. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. All right, so we will move into our policy and planning discussions, and first on the list is discussion regarding the long-term facilities. Mike?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, for those following at home tonight, I'm on slide number 10, and as the Mayor stated, rather, the purpose of tonight's discussion is to continue on with the discussions on the long-term facilities plan item. Now, as council is well aware, when we talked about the goals for our facilities plan, I thought it would be a good first step, since it's been some time since we talked about the facilities plan, is to briefly rehash some of the goals that have been talked about associated with these proposed investments to our community. Now, overall, when we consider the investments that we are considering tonight, some of the goals that have been mentioned by the council and staff is ultimately when we talk about these investments, what we're hoping to do is improve the quality of life in our community. We're also considering investments that have the potential to help attract new citizens to our community. And another side benefit to all of it, which is very important from the financial stability standpoint on this, as well as what we're hoping to do as well, is increase the city's tax base as well. So when we look at overall goals for the facility plan, I always think it's good to keep those in mind as we talk about potential investments for the city, and particularly as it applies to financing as well. So let's go ahead, please, Mandy. Now, as far as what estimated cost of the facility is roughly $17.7 million, and the Friends have informed me that they believe as far as the ultimate fundraising for the project of that $17.7 million, they believe that we can fundraise approximately $4 to $5 million for the project, which is a significant amount of money for the project as well. They also informed staff as far as their fundraising goals, and the council has considered whether we renovate the existing community center or we build a new community center. Their priority or their emphasis or their focus rather on that would be definitely to rehabilitate the existing community center. That's what's been proposed to staff on that as well. So before we move on from the Pella Community Center on to the other projects under consideration this evening, is there any questions on the status of for either this was being proposed by the Friends or the existing community center or the proposed performing arts center?
The 5.5 million, has that been adjusted here recently?
Yeah, I'd say, Mayor, that's a very good point. What we did is a part of the analysis for the Performing Arts Center, we actually asked our engineer to bring the cost up to date for both the renovation to the existing community center as well as the $5.5 million. And so the number that we referenced in the report was actually at $5.2 million. So we're a little bit on the high side, but that was the engineering estimate that was given to us. It was intended to reflect the construction cost of this project was undertaken in 2023. In addition, as far as the proposed wing addition, we've also chatted with the engineers on that project as well, and that has also been adjusted to be reflected the 2003 bidding cost or construction cost as well. Okay, let's go ahead, please, Mandy. The other project that we've talked about for the community is potentially a new indoor recreation center. And the intention of this project, once again, is to be a state-of-the-art facility for the community. It's been one of the items that, from a staff level anyway, we've received frequent requests as far as recreational activity, specifically for winter months as well. Now, when we talk about the estimated cost of this project, we have a range of estimated roughly between $30 to $50 million. Now, to put that into perspective, when we talk about the 75,000 square foot facility, and I want to emphasize this is a staff estimate at this point when we talk about the 75,000 square foot facility. We believe, as council will look at that, consider that option, that would be probably at roughly right around a $30 million investment that we have here in that staff estimate at this point in time. The 125,000 square foot facility would be in the range of what we believe closer to the $50 million investment level on this as well. But when we look at the facility and what's being proposed with the facility, once again, it's intended to be a state-of-the-art facility for the community and has lots of activities available for that as well. We have pictures up on slide number 12, some of the proposed activities. The facility would include a competition swimming pool, along with a recreational swimming pool that's not shown up here on the big board. It would have an indoor walking facility, roughly what's being proposed with the original concept, which was the 125,000 square foot facility. Would be 3 basketball courts, including a multi-purpose gym as well. There would also be workout facilities that would be included with this project. And in addition, what we would also have, and you can see pictures here, would be a proposed rock climbing wall. In addition, there would be kitchen facilities and various amenities, associated amenities as well with the facility. And once again, when we look at it, the engineering that we have performed on the project is roughly at the $50 million level for the 125,000 square foot facility. Staff is estimating the range of cost on this at this point in time. We've looked at other comparable facilities around the state of Iowa that have recently built. And we've compared those along with the expectations that council's talked about with this facility. And we've made some similar adjustments that we have on our end to come up with what we believe would be the $30 million estimate at this point in time as far as the range of cost for the facility. So before we go on, is there any questions on the indoor recreation center?
I assume at some point there will be community input into what all activities are there.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, if we could hold on to that question, we could circle back and talk about the community input highlights we get through this project. But very good point. There will be lots of these projects. I think it's a fair statement for any one of these projects that we're going to be showing tonight that there will be community input solicited on each and every one of these projects. facility such as this, there'll be an extensive engineering design phase of the project, that there'll be numerous meetings with the engineers. So it's our anticipation that there will be public input solicited on this project.
Other governmental entities, primarily the school and perhaps the county? Is that where you would go with that?
Yeah, and Councilmember Banstra, I'll circle back. I have that one specifically.
Okay,
And thank you for reminding me on that. I would have skipped right over that line item. The thoughts are, when you look at this facility, this is a state-of-the-art facility. This will be a regional attraction for our community. Now, when we look at this, as the City of Pella will be very fortunate to have this facility within our community because we believe there will be lots of benefits, not only for the City of Pella, but also some other governmental entities that share our jurisdiction on that as well. So when we talk about potential other partnerships with other governmental entities that should as well consider the benefits of this project, consider being potential partners with us. Specifically, what we're going to be talking about later on in the presentation is the state of Iowa, Marion County, as well as the Pella City School District. And we'll elaborate on each one of those later on in the presentation. But those would be the three entities that we would think would also benefit from the facility such as this evening. Okay. Good question, and thank you for reminding me on that. Let's go ahead, Randy. That was associated with the Indoor Recreation Center, and this is a project that we have listed up here, and we're showing it separately because if you recall, when we talked about the overall goals for the project, one of the things that we considered was really the hope to increase the city's tax base and facilitate additional development. That's one of the overreaching goals of the facilities plan. The University Street extension has been shown in the city's comprehensive plan and our transportation plan for some time. But when you look at the proposed University Street extension, as well as the baseline drive extension project that's being proposed here, what the thoughts are is by extending University Street out from 240th Avenue to 250th Avenue, that would facilitate additional street connectivity within our community. It would also provide a second access to the Pella community, to the Pella Sports Park as well. In addition, we believe a project such as this magnitude would also have some potential to facilitate additional development for around this area. To orientate the members of the audience, the Pella Community School District is located right over here. Pella Christian High is down here. And we do have some ag ground that could be developed in the future for the City of Pella. So this project serves two purposes. It would provide a second connection point to the Pella Sports Park. In addition, it has the potential to encourage and incentivize additional development within our community as well. I believe in the city's comprehensive plan, this area was identified for additional development, potential residential development out as well. So that's an important thought to keep in mind. In addition, when we talk from the quality of life standpoint and look at the street extension, what the project would also include would be a walking trail as well. So that's very important. For those of you that recall when we planned the Pella Sports Park, one of the key items that's talked about a lot was children and their access to the sports park. For those that didn't have transportation by car, thought was it's very, very important at some point in time that we provide bicycle access to the Pella Sports Park. This project would certainly accommodate this. We believe also in working with potential partners on the project that if we're talking about a trail extension out to the project as well, one of the items that should be connected at a minimum is connecting that trail system down to Caldwell Park as well. So we believe this project has a lot of benefit. But as far as University Street, it would be twofold. It would provide a secondary access to the Pella Sports Park as well. In addition, we believe that this project meets a key point in our transportation plan, within the city's comprehensive plan for some point in time. It has the potential to further assist or encourage development in the area as well. So overall, when we look at this, again, we're looking at a $6 million estimated cost. And once again, when we talk about the city's facility plans and this project as well, we believe there are potential partnerships for this project that should be considered as well, that would be mainly other governmental entities as well. So before we move off of University Street, are there any questions on this proposed project? Okay, let's go ahead, please, Andy, and talk about the soccer complex, and I'll probably be switching between slides, but I don't too far ahead of folks at home. For those following at home, I'm on slide 14 tonight. What we have here is a proposed concept for the Pella Soccer Complex that's been discussed at the staff level, and there's been informal discussion. But as we consider potential investments within the community, one of the items that we have identified is the existing soccer complex. It is in need of some repairs or investments. The irrigation system that staff's understanding is roughly 29 years old and will need to be replaced at the soccer complex. In addition, we've received frequent requests to pave the parking lot of the soccer complex as well as the access drive of the soccer complex. When you look at the paving of the parking lot of the soccer complex plus replacement of the irrigation system, those could be significant costs for the city. So one of the concepts that was discussed when you look at the long-term plans for the soccer complex is, and you consider there could be extensive improvements needed at the existing complex, we came up with a thought, at least we feel that it should be, and I want to stress this is just a tentative concept, proposal, discussion. We thought this is the right forum to do this. But one of the items that we discussed was, what if you were to relocate the soccer complex to the existing sports park? And so with that, two things. Mandy, we can go back to slide number 13 briefly, please. What you can see right here is with the city sports complex, this is the proposed location to relocate the existing soccer complex from Idaho Drive to the Pella Sports Complex. The cost to do so would roughly be $2.8 million on that as well. Some of the benefits that we believe, looking long-term by relocating it out from a maintenance standpoint, would definitely be easier for our crews to maintain the soccer fields if everything was all together. It would also consolidate most of the city's recreational activities in one spot. In addition, this goes nicely with the planned street extension for University Street as well as Baseline Drive as well. So we believe there's lots of advantages to have the soccer complex relocated to the Pella Sports Park. And Andy, if we can go back to slide number 14, if we were to do so, and this is basically on a preliminary plan, as council is aware, on Neal Drive and Idaho Drive, just Neal Drive, 218th Avenue, have recently paved the road down to Shady Brook right here. With the relocation or potential relocation of the existing soccer complex out there, that could free up that property for further development within the city. As the council is well aware, housing was identified as a definite need within our community. If we were to undertake that project and relocate the soccer fields to the Pella Sports Park, that could free up the existing 30-acre soccer complex for additional development, residential development in the future. So this is an item as we consider improvements to the existing soccer complex. One of the items that always comes up is, well, what other options have we considered? This is the other option that we have considered as we look into. And we thought, once again, that this was the appropriate forum to be talking about vision, and particularly when we look at projects that could help attract additional development within the community. Housing is definitely a priority within our community. And considering that we just made a significant improvement in this area, we believe that this could be a prime piece of property for additional residential development as well. So with that, I know that was a lot to digest, but we'd be happy to answer any questions on the concept. I want to stress at this point, this is a concept that staff has looked into on it, and it's just simply a concept that is more in line with, as we consider necessary improvements to the existing soccer complex, what alternatives could the city have in lieu of making improvements to the existing soccer complex? Okay. All right, I'll take that as a cue and move on. All right. Okay. Let's talk about the Pella Dog Park. One item that we had at the city level is the Pella Dog Park Association for some time now has indicated a strong desire to have a dog park for the community. And I'd say this group has worked very hard on this matter over the years on it, and they look for a potential partnership with the city. But as we consider the Pella Dog Park, when we talk about this roughly, the overall game plan or long-term game plan would be about a little over 3 acres for a proposed dog park. Phase 1 of the project would just be about 1.6 acres. Now, when we look at the estimated cost of the project, somewhere in that phase 1, depending on the amenities that would be added, is somewhere between $310,000 to $372,000. The overall plan for the 3-acre park would be about $472,000. Now, what the Dog Park Association has proposed to the City of Pella, they'd like to partner with the City of Pella, and they're asking for the city to provide a site for the project. In addition, they've also indicated that they're willing to contribute $100,000 for the project for phase 1, and they believe ultimately for the phase 1 improvements they can contribute up to $200,000 for the project. So when we talk about the phase 1, that's between $300,000 and $310,000. Now I want to stress, we've looked for sites at this, and one of the things that we came across, and we've been at this for some time from the staff level, is this project project is what I would label as site challenge on it as well. And what we've had with this is specifically located in Dog Park is we've had other sites that have been located within town that the city owns property on, but they've been in residential neighborhoods as well. So based on our staff analysis and looking at places for the park, and when you consider placement of a dog park, some of the items that you got to consider is not placing them near heavy residential neighborhoods. In addition, generally, the qualities that make up a good location for a park are the same for a dog park as well, because there are children in the area. So one of the sites that we have considered at the staff level is potentially located in the proposed dog park at the Pella Sports Park. But before we cement this as an official recommendation, we think it's very, very, and I can't stress this enough, important that the city council solicit the input of the Fields of Our Future. Now, the council is aware, but maybe for those following at home, when we talk about Fields of Our Future, this is the entity that originally contributed a significant amount of money to build the Pella Sports Park. Overall, from the city's standpoint, the Pella Sports Park was about a $9 million project. The city contributed roughly $3.5 million to the Pella Sports Park. The rest of the funding was privately raised, and a significant portion of it was by Fields of Our Future. And so, on any new addition to the Pella Sports Park, it's very important that we solicit the input of Fields of Our Future on this as well, because they would have a vested interest with any proposal on this. And so, our recommendation is that the council wanted to consider this as we do continue to work on our due diligence with the Pella Dog Park, is that we not only consider the financial implications of the dog park as well with the operational needs for the dog park, but that we also consider the input of Fields of Our Future and the potential site as well. So with that, Mayor, before I go on with things, is there any questions on the proposed dog park or plan of action for the proposed dog park? And I would also say, Councilmember Hawkins and Councilmember Ford, if you have anything to add, you work very closely with staff on this project since its initial conception, so feel free to add any additional items that I may have overlooked or missed.
No, I think we're pretty excited about this, that just, even the way the land is, kind of provides natural barriers, and it's just a nice space, and site challenge is certainly a good way to describe what we've been working through for the time we've been on council. So.
I'd say we're excited about any spot.
I'm pretty sure it's been at least 6 years in discussion. Yes, time to do something.
All right, Mr. Mayor, let's switch gears on this and let's talk about the city's financial contributions or potentially our fiscal capacity for these projects. And I want to stress, before we go on to this next phase of the presentation, that this is a tentative proposal and it's meant really for example purposes only. And I would also like to state that all the projects that we talked about tonight, ultimately the city council is going to make a decision on which projects receive funding and which projects receive potential partnerships with the city of Pella, as well as the size and scope of each project that we discussed tonight. Now, as far as what I would characterize at the staff level is the city's base plan. Really, this base plan was really developed when we look at what I would characterize as the minimum investment. So when we talk about base plans, I want to make perfectly clear, this is the minimum amount that the investment that we believe would be necessary really to build a new indoor recreation center for the community as well as maintain the existing community center. Now, in looking at this plan, once again, when we talk about the plan that we're going to talk about this evening, the city's minimum plan, which we call base plan on it, it's a $45 million plan that we have tonight that we're going to be discussing. Now, this plan is based on maintaining the city's existing property tax rate as well as our other rates, as well as existing service levels for the community on that. Now, as far as the city's contribution and what we've identified, I want to say these numbers are preliminary in nature, and they can change depending on construction, and there's a few variable factors. But overall, if we were going to bid out the projects and you ask staff's recommendation on what we feel we can contribute within our existing tax structure, we would state that that number we believe is roughly a $22 million investment by the city or $22 million contribution by the city of Pella. Plan that we're going to be presenting this evening is roughly a 50-50 partnership. So if you were to look at the city's investment, raise $23 million from other governmental entities as well as private donations. Now, Mr. Michael Maloney is here this evening from DA Davidson, and he's going to take a deep dive into city finances for us. But before we do, I just wanted to highlight a little bit of the items that are concerned from the city's investment. I think it would be helpful if we go through Michael's presentation this evening. So let's go ahead, please, Mandy. Now, when we talk about $22 million, that would be the city's potential contribution for these projects. What we have listed up here, there's primarily two principal sources. That would be existing cash on hand, as well as the new local option sales and services tax that would be proposed to be a part of this as well. So Mandy, let's go ahead. When we look at the city's estimated cash contribution, just to simplify things, if you were to look at our audit from last June, roughly the city had $28.6 million in cash and investments on hand. The amount of money that are currently reserved for existing debt that's outstanding and other restricted funds is $5.3 million, so that is definitely off limits, untouchable on it. Operating reserves, that's the amount of fund balance that we believe is necessary to operate the City of Pella. That also corresponds to various industry standards that we have for maintaining existing fund balances and what's required really for those operations. So that would be the city as a whole. When we look at that, that would be roughly $13 million. And the reserve for capital projects, those would be projects that council's already authorized that the funding setting aside, and we're really waiting for the projects to occur. That was roughly $3.5 million. So when you add up all those items and you come down what we believe as far as surplus cash or undesignated cash could be contributed to these projects is roughly $6.8 million. If you recall, we said the city's investment was at $22 million, and if you stated right now, just to be on the conservative side, we're even on the low side of that. So we'd be at, as far as an estimated cash contribution of $5 million, but I want to emphasize the city council is the ultimate decision maker, and this item as far as the city's cash contribution on the project. We're stating for planning purposes because this is a tentative plan. It's also a plan that has not had, I'd say, advanced engineering on these projects at this point in time. Going in from a planning standpoint, we're saying for planning tonight that number's at $5 million, but certainly would be increased upon council's desires as well. So before we go on to the local option sales and services tax bond, is there any question about the city's cash contribution?
Just a quick question on the operating reserves portion. Is any of that mandated, or is that to retain a bond rating, or is that just to make you sleep at night, or what's where does that number come from?
All of the above. On that $13 million is made up, a good example of that would be when we talk about industry standards, and let's just say, for instance, our electric utility. The American Public Power Association has a formula for determining fund balances that electric utilities should have. It's based off a formula on your power supply costs and other major capital expenditures that you're taking place or projected to take place. That's a computed number that is their recommendation as well. Whenever the city goes out for credit rating, there's always a considerable amount of discussion with credit rating agencies on the amount of fund balance that you need to have. As a general rule of thumb, and I think sure Michael Maloney will tell you that, it's always been viewed cash as king on things, and specifically when you look at the city's general fund on this. We're a AA3 rated by Moody's. We're one of the few entities in Iowa, rural Iowa especially, that has that high credit rating. One of the items that they've always told us is that really our fund balance needs to be in the range of 33% to 50% of annual general fund expenditures. So it's a combination of both industry rated standards that we've taken from the American Public Power Association, credit rating agency standards for fund balances, maintaining that as well. And then in addition, when we look at potentially capital projects that the city has planning now, I think your characterization of credit rating agency, industry standards, and being able to sleep at night is a good description of how we came up with this number. Okay, let's go ahead, please, Mandy. So Michael is going to walk us through tonight as far as potential new local option sales and services tax bond, so I won't steal any of his thunder. But as we talk about the local option sales and services tax bond and these projects that we're discussing this evening, what we're really talking about is funding the majority of these projects with new local option sales and services tax. The city's current local option sales and services tax expires on December 31st, 2023. What we're showing you up on the big board, and just to explain the done over the previous local option sales and services tax, or actually the current local option sales and services tax. If you look at the amount of revenue that we've taken over, projected over the 12-year period of time with the current tax, we believe that's going to be roughly about $18.2 million. And if you really were to focus on this under state law, actually I think this local option is an interesting breakdown. But when we look at what was funded out of that tax, roughly half of the tax funded what I would view as quality of life projects that we had with the current tax. And then roughly about 50% of the tax was geared towards property tax relief as well as street improvements within the community. So from our standpoint, if you recall, the plan that we're talking about tonight, we said not only does the $45 million plan maintain the existing tax rates, one of the items that we said is existing services as well. Currently, local option is used for property tax relief as well as street improvements in there. And looking forward on a go-forward basis, when we look at a new tax, if there's a significant change in the distribution of the tax, then that could call into question how do you maintain existing services, in other words, existing funding for streets. So from our viewpoint, we work things backwards. We look at existing or projected income from a new tax, and we computed a bond payment based on that, and it's roughly about 50-50 on a go-forward basis, and that's how we came up with the amount of principal and interest payment that we thought we could afford to maintain existing funding for the existing streets in the city's proposed capital improvement plan. So Michael goes through the demonstration tonight. He's going to be talking about a $17 million bond, but from our standpoint, it all factors on the projected principal and interest payment of that bonded as well. And obviously, when you talk about a $17 million bond issue, a huge factor in that is what the interest rates would be as far as when the city issues a debt in that as well. So please keep that in mind, and that's more of a timing issue as well. But I thought it was important when we talk about local option tax, that's very clear from our standpoint. We tried to plan this in a very fiscally responsible manner, and really in a manner that does not jeopardize essential services or essential infrastructure, funding for essential infrastructure as well. So roughly what we've done over the last 12 years, we've spent half of the money on property tax relief and half of the money in project street repairs. That's really what is being proposed on a go-forward basis as well. So with that, Mandy, let's go ahead, and then we can move to the next slide. Now, as far as the cash contribution for the city, again, we're at the $5 million level. The new local option sales and services tax bond is being proposed at $17 million. So the cash total contribution that Michael is going to be covering tonight is really $22 million level for the city's facility plan. So Mandy, I think we got one final slide before we turn things over to Michael. Listed on the left-hand side is the categories. I want to stress this is a base plan. It is a tentative proposal. It's also based on minimum amounts. And when we talk about minimum amounts, you're talking about the minimum amount what we believe is necessary, likely to build an indoor recreation center, as well as the minimum amounts that it takes at a minimum to maintain the community center as well. Now, a huge item that we're going to have over here when we look at the city's plan on this is other contributions from other governmental entities and donations. There's a significant amount of work that still needs to be done on that end. But I would also like to state the council at any time can certainly go above this amount, but there may be consequences or there may be tax implications if we do go above this that would always have to be taken into consideration. So as far as the overall base plan that we're considering tonight, it's at minimum amounts as well. And I'd like to reemphasize the council will be the entity that will determine the size and the scope of these projects, and these are just tentative estimates at this. As you can see, we've also included the contingency amount as well. So with that, before we turn it over to Michael, these are the questions or action items that we would like to get your input at the end of the evening, and I'm going to be circling back at the conclusion of Michael's presentation and asking directly action items or direction on each one of these items. If you recall, we stated that the proposed indoor recreation center is intended to be a state-of-the-art facility. One of the items that we had, we had estimated a range of cost of $30 to $50 million. We feel good about the $50 million for $125,000. If we had to go and size and scale our phase in the project, that's where we feel that we would need additional engineering services for that project. We also feel that a facility of that size will take roughly 2 years to construct. And so from our thoughts is it would be very helpful if we could proceed with engineering services for the new indoor recreation center. We'd like to get authorization to send out proposals to engineering firms to solicit that for the new facility. That's going to be one action item. Item number 2, for each of the projects that we talked about this evening, we'd like to receive your permission to continue fundraising efforts with each one of the major partners on this. So we'll circle back to each one of these groups. We'll talk about city's contribution as well as refine their estimates on what they believe they can contribute to the project. And hopefully we'll be able to circle back to define size and scope for each one of these projects that we can make a decision on the project in the near future. In addition, we'd like your permission to reach out to the other governmental entities. The state of Iowa right now has a few grant opportunities that we would like to apply for to help with this funding assistance on these projects. We believe they will be a beneficiary of improvement of the city's facility plan, and they should be a partner to our projects as well. We also believe the same holds true for Marion County. We'd like to reach out to the county and talk about funding opportunities as well with them. In addition, the Pella Community School District, we believe, should be considered as a potential partner for these projects as well. Now, we'd like to reach out with them and negotiate with each one of these entities. In addition, what we're going to be talking about very briefly at the conclusion of Michael's presentation is an anticipated timeline for renewal of the city's local option sales and services tax. We think it's very important that this is the key mechanism that will be the funding source for these projects, that we establish a schedule, stick to the schedule. And again, that's under the assumption that we'd like to complete these projects within the next 3 years on it as well. That's the overall game plan for this. We really need to establish a schedule for the local option renewal, and we need to stick with it. So we'll have some thoughts on the tentative schedule for renewal of the local option sales and services tax that we'll talk about. More preliminary goal. That goal will be the fall of this year from the city staff standpoint, have a referendum with the community. So before we turn things over to Michael Maloney, is there any questions for staff on the base plan or tentative plan that's being proposed this evening?
So just at the end of the night, we need to give our support to these action items starting to happen. Purpose of it. All good stuff.
With that, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to go ahead and turn the floor to Mr. Michael Maloney.
Thanks, Mark. Welcome, Mayor. Thanks, Council. I've got some more slides to add for you. I have to follow Mike Nardini, and I don't have any of the fun graphics that Manny has. Today. Manny, let's go to the first slide of content here for you. So Mike did a great job overviewing the actual projects, what's actually going to be going on, et cetera. I want to give you a broad overview of what we need to be thinking about in terms of financing capital projects here in Iowa. The big 3 up on the board there for you. Authority, capacity, and repayment. Mike hit on some of these at a high level. We're going to drill down on those a little bit today, but those are the 3 things I want you to take away at the end of the night, all right? Authority is how do we have access to capital to go borrow for these types of projects? Capacity is do we have the legal thresholds available to us to do that? And 3, repayment, age-old, how do we pay for that? So we'll drill into those a little bit today. Mandy, next slide. So one of the nice things here is the city starting with a great framework. This has been something that's been under planning for some time, so you guys are not coming just with conceptual ideas, so you'll have some more decision-making input, but there's a multi-year planning aspect to this. One of the things Mike did that's a really good job, and the council is tracking, is it's not just about, oh, it's a nice shiny building, or a nice new park, or a nice facility. There are operational costs involved. The city understands that, you're modeling that, we're aware of that. That's how we end up with successful plans. We don't want to see, like other communities that misstep and think, great, we've got the new shiny building, we don't know how to pay for that going forward. That is incorporated here into not just the tax base and tax rates, but the long-term planning. That's how we know it to be successful. Mike hit on this already, but just as a big picture overview, all the various stakeholders, the council, the community, the various boards and commissions that were detailed in each of the different project slides need to be factored into account as your decision-making goes on. So this is a holistic approach, and I just want to be clear on that before we get into some of the numbers. Mandy, next slide. So let's talk a little about capital funding sources. This is the menu here. I like to say in Iowa, it's a la carte, not a buffet, in terms of what you've got for dollars. With that, what we're talking about specifically as potential leverage would be the debt service levy component of the city's overall property tax rate and the local option sales taxes that Mike had talked about here. Now, in the base plan that we're discussing, it is solely focused on leveraging that sales tax revenue stream, okay? The additional cost may need to be supported by the debt service levy component of the overall property taxes. And that's what we'll summarize at the end of today's presentation. The other items are not expected to be utilized for the projects we're talking about today. We're just showing our work here on this slide. All right? So what's our overall goal? Again, Mike's knocked this out of the park here already. So I'm just going to take a big picture look at this. On financing, we're talking about a multi-year financing plan and using some debt to pay for some of these projects. We want to align the repayment of these projects from the constituents that are going to benefit for it. It's a generational type of project here for these buildings. That's why we want to leverage these sources, leverage the long-term revenue streams for that purpose. Obviously, at these dollar amounts, we're not going to be able to pay for them up front. So part of them will be needed financed over time. That's the reason that we're talking about this today. Maybe next slide. So I think the most basic standpoint, Mike alluded to this a little bit, would be from a capacity threshold, general obligation bonds. That is going to be the city's lowest cost of financing for capital. It's the full faith and credit pledge of the city. You can use other sources as they're legally available to repay the debt. In this case, we're talking about leveraging GO bonds repaid by that sales tax revenue stream that Mike was talking about. One of the things that's great, one of the few charts or graphs that I have for you is the next slide, is that the city is starting at a really good level. We do not have a lot of debt outstanding. So even though we're talking about what seem to be sizable projects, in reality, they're not that large as we think about municipal government in 2022, 23, and beyond. Even with the type of debt we're looking at, you've got about $50 million of capacity for this upcoming budget year. That's significant. Many communities are the other way around. So instead it's 85% available for Pella, it's 85% utilized. I want you to keep that in mind when we talk about things from a capacity standpoint. Mandy, there is the first chart. You'll notice there's a lot of white space on that page. And the reason is the city does not have a lot of outstanding debt. There is capacity to do this project. Remember our big three at the beginning: authority, capacity, repayment. From a capacity standpoint, there is very little bit of debt outstanding. For municipalities like the city, debt is not like putting things on the credit card. You have a set repayment stream. It's like paying off your mortgage, and at very low rates. So you'll notice that gets paid every year on the little bit of debt that the city currently has outstanding. Take a snapshot of this one in your mind. We'll refer to it with the projected debt table at the end of the presentation today. Mandy, next slide. So let's go back to that authority piece a little bit here. We need to get authority to be able to issue the related debt. And one of the things is that for the types of work that we're doing, it's a general corporate purpose under the state law. For these types of projects, we got to go about 40 years back in the state code, and it's based on population limits. For the city's population limit, you're limited to $700,000 of borrowing for these projects. Now we could slice it up a few ways. We did it 3 different ways for 3 different types of projects. $2 million is a lot less than the numbers Mike was talking about. So we need to be thoughtful about that. I wanted to be clear on that when we come back to the necessary extension of the sales tax revenue stream. Maybe next slide. So what we want to do is, on a repayment standpoint, leverage that revenue stream provided by the sales tax revenues, but our backup for that GO repayment is property taxes. I said we'd only use that if we need to. We want to do more projects, or for some reason sales tax revenues went somewhere else. That is where we use the debt service levy component of the city's property tax rate. Historically, the city's been monitoring that and maintaining it at about 20 cents per mil. So 20 cents out of your total property tax rate. For our base plan, we're talking about not changing that over the life of the debt, okay? I have a for instance in here only of $1, which seems really low. Everywhere else I give this presentation, and $1 seems really, really high for Pella. But for illustration purposes only, $1 per year would provide about $726,000 in annual revenues for debt repayment. And over a 20-year life cycle, 20 years is the length we can borrow from municipalities in Iowa, gives about $14.5 million to leverage additional revenues. That's a for instance. Paint the picture here. I want to be clear on that point. Let's keep going. We talked about instead working to leverage an extension of the sales tax revenue stream. So with that in mind, Mike already mentioned at the end of 23, this will expire. What we're talking about leveraging is an additional 20-year term on that revenue stream. been in the neighborhood of $1.5 to $1.8 million per year. That would provide somewhere in the neighborhood of $30 to $36 million over the next 20-year period. That ties right back into what Mike showed, that 10-year period of $18.2 million projects over the term that we're expecting to expire. We're just going to leverage this for the projects in theory that were laid out here that the council would make some decisions on going forward. So again, this is the one we're going to tap. The debt service levy one we showed would be the backup for either additional projects or if we need it. Maybe it's local option sales tax in Iowa. There's a few ways to leverage that revenue stream. The city has experience doing this before. What they would likely do is you would issue geo sales tax revenue bonds. It's effectively a double barrel approach to borrowing for debt. Was the pool, Mike? The pool was the last time that the city did the same concept. So again, as I mentioned before, it means that we're pledging sales tax revenues first. If we need more dollars, we use geo repayment with the city's debt service levy. That'd be the middle option that we're talking about. It would count against that city's geo debt limit like we're talking about, but it would give us the ability to not just capture the repayment source, but also the authority that we're talking about. We'd be able to get that authority through the referendum extending the sales tax revenue stream and the public hearing process that we're normally doing for geo funds. Okay, next slide. So scenario assumptions. Mike's hit on a lot of these. We're showing our work again here. Priority is securing that revenue stream, the sales tax dollars going forward beyond the end of 2023. We build that along with the outside contributions that we talked about, fundraising, other outside contributions from our partners. And then if needed, we could leverage that other debt service levy revenue stream. Everybody's been nodding along the whole time. Mike and I with the program shows the actual impact. We're tired of the words. I understand. Andy, next slide. So, projected financing plan. This is exactly what Mike had laid out in his, just shown a different way. Same idea, base version here, $45 million in, $45 million in total projects. Again, that's got a contingency of $2.5 million. These are preliminary. We're reiterating that today. This is the, for instance, the base case for your consumption today. So we talked about potentially financing $17 million. We talked about the authority. We've talked about the repayment. We talked about the capacity. I think something that, Mike, Corey, and myself, the thing that keeps us up at night, we know you're a growing community. We don't want to over leverage that, but we need to be reasonable. So when we've been working, we've tried to have reasonable projections for growth for the city going forward. That shouldn't be zero growth, but it needs to be modest and kept in mind. We've done that here. The fact of the city's credit rating, which was already brought up tonight, we need to be thoughtful about that. Not just from a cash balances standpoint, but the amount of debt outstanding. Look, it's more debt than the city's had. It's just not high leverage compared to your peer communities. That being said, even though it's up front, I would mention it could put downward pressure on the city's credit rating. In theory, that is a important thing. Everybody wants to have a sterling credit rating. Mike mentioned the electric utility. Mike mentioned the general fund piece. He's not tooting his own horn here, but the city's maximizing what you're doing on the rating side already because of sound financial management for a long term. In reality, it's not worth a whole lot in terms of interest cost. These are generational projects. We're not saying that we expect any type of downgrade. We just want to make sure it's clear and that we articulate that up front rather than after. Andy. I'm not going to read everything off the slide. It's just about making sure that the analysis that we're showing our work here. So, modest growth assumptions beyond some of the things we already know of programs. 2% to your existing tax base going forward, plus some of the near-term projects that you've been making as priorities from an economic development standpoint. All right? 20-year financing. We're talking about, even with financing all these projects, being around 50% of your debt capacity. That's still very low relative to your peer communities. Leveraging the $1.1 million in sales tax revenues annually to pay things back. That would not impact property taxes, as we've talked about. And we've been clear that any additional operating costs that are in there, we've plugged a number for now, are absorbed into the city's overall property tax rate. That's not the debt component. It's just saying new growth will help offset those additional costs. So we've been thoughtful about the fully loaded cost elements of having these facilities and operating them successfully over the long term. Maybe next slide. All right. Could have just started with this one. would have saved everybody a lot of time. It's the city levy impact. So Mike said base case was that overall $45 million concept. I think the question would be, if we wanted to do more, or we needed to do more, what would that impact be on property taxes? The base case scenario is no change to that debt levy component, 0. What we're showing here is what does each additional quarter on the debt service levy component do in terms of providing additional revenues? So how could we further leverage 20-year debt for the purpose of this project? The shading in gray in the middle column shows the additional project costs that we could theoretically absorb. Preliminary numbers, conservative, for instance. In short, each quarter would get you just shy of about $2.9 million in additional projects. If you add up 4 quarters for $1, you're just shy of $12 million in additional projects. So if we talk about thinking about Mike's range of projects, in theory, that's another 11 on top of your 45. For instance, a lot to digest, a lot to think about. That's the impact statement overall. No one really thinks about millage rates except me and Corey probably, but to be clear what that does, based on your $100,000 of residential valuation, a quarter is about $1 a month of your property taxes. Again, rollback rates, your values going up in assessments, other issues, but just all things being equal, a quarter on the levy is $1 a month. So if we have $1 on the levy, $4 per month. And again, those are all above and beyond the base case scenario. Okay? Anyways, I told you to get this chart back. The blue is just levering on debt on top of what we had there before. The goofy thing about this chart, you'll notice on the right column, 50% of your debt capacity. I'm giving this presentation or similar ones around the state. That top line is usually 100%. So overall, this is just for scale purposes here, but we're showing the debt is repaid over a 20-year period, and that debt burden is reducing. So again, higher than it's been historically for Pella, generational investments, low compared to peers. Okay? Maybe let's keep it going. See a lot of nodding heads. That's a good thing. Kind of makes the stage right. Council action steps for financing. Mike's going to get back to the timeline. Let's tie things in a bow. You got to get your projects and everything figured out from an estimate standpoint. We need to understand our upper range of what we're doing to gain that authority that we talked about. We need to be clear on the purpose, the types of projects we're doing, and how much they're going to cost. Because we know inflation is a very real thing these days, we also want to know when we're going to be doing those projects so we can make sure we're thoughtful about those numbers. All right? Want to be sure to align things with the referendum calendar. Mike's going to talk about that before we wrap up here. And then we're going to want to gain authority and finish bidding and design in time to move forward with the bond process. Once you get through all those basic steps, it's typical of the financing work we've done before, getting an offering document together, marketing investors, selling the bonds, delivering to the city. Appreciate the scale of these projects relative to what Pella's done in the past. I will tell you these are not particularly large in these days for municipalities around the country. $100 million is not a big project anymore nationally. I just want to give you some context for that. Sometimes it's not the person to say it. You don't hear it. I want to make sure that was clear from someone that's 50 miles away. That's it for me today. Mike, Corey, Andy, anything I'm missing, let me know. Otherwise, I'll leave this tape right. Mike can finish up. Always enjoy talking to the council. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Michael. Before you start, I've got to take a quick break. Anybody else? I think I'm ready.
What we have here is comments for back to direction time from staff. And the items we're looking for council direction on this evening, we'll get these off one at a time. We're requesting permission to send out a request for proposals for engineering services for the indoor recreation center. If council were to proceed with the contract for design and architectural services for the facility, this will put us on track to be able to bid the project in the spring of 2023. The project will take roughly 2 construction seasons, so it will be calendar year 2023 and calendar year 2024, with the facility potentially opening up in the spring of 2025. If we're going to hit that mark, we should start to initiate engineering services as soon as possible. So our request this evening would be to simply proceed with sending out an RFP and requesting proposals for engineering services. Council would also, if before any contract is signed, council would also be approving the contract
just on top of that, on May 3rd, I'm gonna have a citizen group, proposed citizen group that will work with the architect, engineer, as they plan this project. I think it's important that we have people from the community to be along the way with the architect and engineer, so that when they end up with a final design, it's what we need and what we want as a community. So we'll have a group that I will suggest, and you guys will have to approve at the May 3rd.
All right, and I'm gonna mix things up and jump down to the third bullet point. We said establish a schedule and approximate timeline for the removal of the city's local option sales and services tax. Our thoughts are, from a planning standpoint, local option is going to be key within these proposed projects. And so what we'd like to have is a referendum within the community this fall, if possible. The preliminary date, I believe, will look at mid-September of this year. In order to initiate a referendum, we'd be looking at seeking council authorization by the end of July. Now, what that means from a planning standpoint, before we get to these projects, really means that would put some emphasis on working with the rest of these projects as far as defining the size and the scope of the project by that time in order to hit that September benchmark on it as well. So with our standpoint, when we're looking at financing the rec center, these potential projects, we'd like to have a referendum this fall potentially on the project. The date that we tentatively established is mid-September of this year. In order to initiate the referendum on that for renewal of the city's local option sales and services tax, we have to have council authorization in July of this year. So is there any questions on the tentative schedule for these projects? Okay, let's talk about the second point. We would like to receive permission to continue to work with each one of the projects this evening that we mentioned. This would be continued work with the Friends of the Community Center to talk about the proposed project, the defined scope of the project, and see how we can work together on the project, as well as we'll continue our efforts with the Friends of the Community Center. We'll also continue to work with the Pella Dog Park Association. And then on the city side of things, with the soccer complex, we'll continue to refine our estimates and look at options for the city's soccer complex as well. Now, in addition to the existing partners that we worked to date on these projects, we would also like to have permission to submit grant applications to the state of Iowa for potential financial assistance for these projects. We would also like permission to contact Marion County for potential partnerships on these projects, as well as the Pella Community School District. So with that, we're basically requesting permission to continue to work with the partners that we've been working with to date, as well as the new governmental entities that we have listed up here on the page.
Moving forward, I think I see head shaking hands.
Okay.
Consensus. Mainly so that when Mike goes to talk to him, he's very sensitive. He can say emphatically that the city council is in favor of pursuing this project. Because that's a question that gets asked when we talk to the city council. Agree with what you're doing here.
Is the Fields of a Future organization still in existence?
The contact, as far as the organization itself, the principal contacts on that are still actively, still involved, still investigating the project. Those would be the primary contact.
Was that a 501c3?
Yes. Yes, it was. Yeah. Now, as far as the status of the organization, that's something I would have to check. As far as I would say the principals and the contact staff work with on the budget. Well, they handle the fundraising. Our principal contacts are still actively involved and have vested interest in the whole sport park, and they will be consulted as well on these projects.
Okay, any other questions, comments? Mike, you have what you need, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so before we move away from this subject, I had a couple things I want to say. An announcement I'd like to make. So hopefully you've been paying attention. You see that there's a couple community needs that we're trying to address here. One is our indoor recreation facilities. In my opinion, we're kind of woefully short as a community of this size and the activities that go on with an indoor rec facility. And also, we've had many conversations about the arts, and so we're trying to figure out how best to move those two. We want to address both of those issues. And Calvin, I don't know if this was coincidence that you brought us these magazines tonight, or if you planned it this way, but one of the things that you talked about, obviously the new all-inclusive playground is a great example of what can happen in Pella. That's a $1.75, I think, approximately $1 million project that the city contributed about $360,000 to, and the rest was raised within this community. And I really liked what you said in relation to the other one. People are calling and asking how it got done in Pella. Well, I don't think any of us in here should be surprised that it got done in Pella, because that's kind of how things work here. We get things done. And so, as related to this project, these projects, we talked about $45 million, and Mike, I think, has done a good job to emphasize that that's our minimum investment we see addressing these two issues. At minimum, we feel like we need to spend $45,000. Or 45 million. 45,000, that wouldn't be too big. $45 million. And if you noticed, the city at this point, we are projecting we can contribute $22 million of that $45 million. So there's a $23 million gap there when you look at that. And so as we've talked about going to these other governmental units, and I'm very, very confident that we will be able to get some serious funding. We've had some preliminary discussions already with these, but I'm confident. But the other part of it is, how's this community going to support this? And I want to say that when we do these projects, again, we're going to receive a lot of phone calls from around the country and say, how does Pella do it? Because I've been, for a while, this obviously has been a priority of mine is the indoor rec facility and getting these projects done. So I've been talking to people for a while, for the last year and a half. And I want to tell you, I want to share tonight that a few of our large corporations have expressed a desire to help us with these projects. And so I can tell you tonight that we at this point have $12 million pledged to these projects. I said $12 million. That is a lot of money from a few of our larger corporations. So suddenly that $23 million gap isn't so big anymore. But and so there's going to be a press release out soon that'll give a little more details about that. I didn't think it would be fair to not let everyone know that there we're starting from there with that kind of a pledge for these projects. And so we're going to be asking the rest of the community in general for support, but to start with that kind of a pledge to these projects is pretty. I don't know what the word is really. I'm struggling to figure out. Fantastic, wonderful, unbelievable, all those types of things come to mind. And so I think that's really exciting for us as a community because there's no doubt, should be no doubt in anybody's mind, we'll get these projects done, and I think we'll fly past that $45 million in a big way and be able to enhance both of these projects to a greater extent. And so that is exciting, very, very exciting to know that kind of support is happening. And I think, when people call and say things like, I don't know how Pella does it, I think that this is just another great example of what you can accomplish when you work together and you do things together. And our large corporations, it's no secret, and the community of Pella have had a long-term relationship of working together and doing things together. And when you do that, you can accomplish a whole lot more than you can on your own. And So I'm really excited about these projects. I'm excited to get this going. I want us to be breaking ground next spring on that indoor rec facility, have all this planning done, and so we're starting from a great spot. So we will certainly be having more discussions along the way. As Mike talked about, the local option sales tax is going to be a big part of this in our ability to fund these projects. So we as a community have to make sure we work together to get that extended so that we have that revenue stream to get the money to do these kind of projects. So again, I say there will be a press release out soon that will have a few more details, but it's $12 million. Don't forget that. That's a big number.
Good job, Mayor.
Okay, we're moving on to the discussion regarding the police department hiring bonus.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, for those who will follow it at home, I'm on slide 41 this evening, and what we'd like to discuss with council is proposed hiring bonus for certified law enforcement officers. And a little bit of background on this request came to us this evening from the Pella Police Department. And when we consider recruiting new officers, it's very important to understand it takes a significant amount of training to become a police officer in the state of Iowa. And even once an officer is trained and goes to the police academy, there's a significant amount of time they have to ride along with other officers before they're able to be on what we call on the streets by themselves as well. So when looking at this item, one of the thoughts that we had as far as a recruitment tool for the Pella Police Department in trying to recruit what we would call certified police officers, so this would be existing police officers that have already been through the police academy, that have already had enough training, on-the-job training, to be a certified officer. If we were able to recruit any of those individuals to the City of Pella in lieu, since they do have that certification, the city would avoid the cost of sending an officer to the police academy. Now, when we look at the cost to send an officer to the police academy, it's roughly $7,000 per year. In addition, with a certified officer, they would also be able to come in and pretty much get up to speed, what we believe, relatively soon, and be able to assume responsibility and assist the Pella Police Department. So one of the thoughts and proposals by the police department is to award a sign-on bonus for officers that are certified, that we believe could help recruit certified officers to the City of Pella. Now, before we get into the details of this, and I turn this over to Chief Shahee to explain the details of how the program would work, I just want to mention from a standpoint at the City of Pella, we're very fortunate that we have not had a lot of turnover at the City of Pella, but I would say not only for the City of Pella, if you were to ask me about concerns and areas of concern about turnover, I would say not only, and I'm going to preface my comment at the City of Pella, but nationwide, I think turnover in police departments is a real thing, to be perfectly honest. And anything that we can do to maintain our current officers as well as recruit new officers is a good thing, in my opinion. And so if you're looking at from an HR standpoint and the need to stay ahead of things on it, this is an item I feel personally that we should be considering. So when we look at sign-on bonus and we go into the next slide, I'd like to turn it over to Chief Shahee to talk a little bit about the mechanics and what's being proposed this evening, Chief. So if you could help fill in the details on this item, please.
Absolutely, be happy to. So I just wanted to share a couple thoughts with you, and doing this for almost 28 years, you know, I've had some challenges as well, but I can harken back to even as little as 8, maybe 10 years ago, and have 80 applicants for one position. Let's face it, the world's changed, and reflect upon our, you know, our own lives in the last 2 years, and look at those issues that we face not only nationally but globally. And so Pella is not exempt from that, and I think I've got some heads shaking in the room that are involved in HR and other aspects, but it is extremely challenging at this point to attract, hire, and retain quality officers. And I will tell you that hiring that quality officer to maintain and improve the quality of life here in Pella, which we all not only need but expect, we're not going to take any shortcuts. We're not going to lower our standards. So that is an added challenge. So the proposal tonight is not, I wish it was our idea, but it's not. It's not innovative. Really, at this point, we're just keeping up with neighboring agencies who are already doing this. And so what this entails is a $6,000 hiring bonus for only certified officers. So when I say certified, I mean a lateral officer, and that can come in two different ways. That can come already certified through the state of Iowa or the Iowa Law Enforcement Academy, or it could come from another certified officer out of state. They are both considered lateral, but the program changes a little bit. If it's an Iowa certified officer, that bonus is going to be $6,000 paid in two payments. Half of that, so $3,000, would be paid upon the completion of the field training program and the probation period. The other half is paid 2 years later, so there's like a retention component built into that. For an out-of-state officer, it's also $6,000, but it doesn't go to the person, because we have to keep in mind that when we bring an out-of-state officer in, such as myself, there's a $2,000 cost that we have to kind of transfer that out-of-state knowledge to Iowa knowledge. So there's a $2,000 cost that we still have to pay to the local law enforcement academies. So their bonus then would be reduced to $4,000 in the same manner. So $2,000 would be awarded upon completion of the probation, and then $2,000 in 2 years. If you look around, some agencies have been offering this for quite some time, and that ranges anywhere from $4,000 to $10,000 as a bonus in various different manners and components. We came with the $6,000 because it does cost us roughly $7,000 to take a brand new recruit and send them through ILEA. Not to mention, as Mike stated, sometimes this can be a 10-month process before we get to that, what we call a solo status. That officer can go out by themselves in the car and handle calls, which is where the value is. If we're looking at current openings, we have 2 current openings. We went a full year, or probably a little bit more than a year, with having full staff. But another thing that I've learned in 28 years is that situation can change at any moment for a variety of reasons. So we have 2 current openings we're trying to fill. We have 2 projected openings before the end of the year, one due to retirement. So we really need to focus our attention on recruiting quality applicants, and sometimes how we can do that is attracting those lateral officers.
So on the 2 that are open now, assuming that's part of the process, any movement or luck at all?
Well, we did a process in February, and I'm throwing rough numbers out here. Paul could probably give you exact. We got less than 10 applicants. Out of that 10, we vetted and invited less than that to our physical testing. And at the end of the day, we were able to certify through our Civil Service Commission 1 officer who then took a job somewhere else. So we're literally back at square zero. I can tell you the 2 officers that left are leaving for the same reasons that you're very predictable seeing a lot of officers leave right now. They're leaving for their family, and they're going into private sector. So the 2 officers that left for that very reason. They chose a different career that's better off for them and their family needs, and I get it. And so that's another challenge that we're facing that we didn't necessarily see as prominent 10 years ago. But it's very real, and it's very now.
Does that $7,000 figure to the academy, is that a check to the academy, or did you calculate in, I guess, the opportunity cost, if I could use that phrase, of not having somebody on the street right away?
No, and that's a great question. That is strictly just what the academy charges us to put that recruit through the academy, with the ancillary charges of the academy costs and ammunition and so forth.
With that being said, I think that 6 and the 4 is too low.
Well,
so how long is the academy? If you that an officer would be going through
4 months.
17 weeks.
Yeah.
And would they be, if someone was, if a new recruit was going through the academy, would they be on payroll at that point too?
Yes, they would. Keep in mind too, just because they graduate the academy doesn't mean they have gone through the agency's field training program, which, depending on how that goes, can be a minimum of 3 months, but it could be up to 4 months. So what we're also looking at when we bring that lateral officer in with that experience and knowledge is that FTO, our program, is slimmed down quite a bit because they already know the job. They're just trying to learn the procedures here at the agency and in Iowa. So
to Calvin's point, the cost to the agency is far higher for a new recruit than even the $7,000 that you showed.
Yes.
Well, I would say, I think Chief explained that this proposal wasn't something they just thought of. It's whatever. So I would say let's give them, approve it, and then if you find difficulties yet, then that gives us room to increase it if this is effective. Tim, what do you say?
Coming back and giving me Andy is not good marketing. I think we'll have to take a look at raising it right off the bat to realistically reflect the cost. And then bring it more and give them that speed.
I think they say the cheapest car is the one you already own, right? Not equating an officer to a car, but I think retention ought to be a big part of the strategy as well.
You know, that could be a different conversation altogether, and I see where you're going, and I don't disagree with you. But what we're seeing now is just a different mindset coming up. I don't know that we're talking about finding that 20-year dedicated officer to Pella PD anymore. I think we should be looking for, gosh, if we can just hang on to them for 5, 6, 7 years, and kind of realize that the mindset of officers now, just based on everything, has changed, and that loyalty just isn't there like when I was coming up, in this job. When I decided to land somewhere, that's where I was. I think you're getting away from that now, and that's the trend that I'm seeing. And, Councilmember Spore, you're shaking your head.
Yeah, we're seeing that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
We're, more and more is how can you get the most out of the people that you have today?
Mm-hmm.
You can't plan on having someone for 20 years anymore.
I mean, retention's always a big thing, and we're always thinking about how we can, treat our folks at the agency and how to retain. So that hasn't escaped us, but I think realistically, we have to kind of change the way we think about long-term employees as far as in the police house.
Well, and I think too, to your point, you're saying they're leaving for family purposes, so it's not really money motivated. That I don't know that even if we talk about.
Sometimes it is. I mean, let's face it. If you want to go to Des Moines, you're probably going to, be at a higher rate, but you're also doing more, right? So.
I guess I'm kind of with Mark. I'll go whatever number you think is the best, but I would not be objecting at all if it was 10 and 8 or 8 and 6, because I think that is still cheaper than the new recruit. And so if we can keep that cost even, I think we're better off that way. Plus, you got somebody on the ground right away. I'll leave that up to you. Going to start with these numbers and go from there.
Well, we kind of came at the 6,000 based on what our neighbors are doing here locally. Not that we necessarily compete honestly with our neighbors. I think we're more in competition with the larger agencies a little bit out. But part of this conversation was that leverage amount of cost, and instead of putting it in this bucket, put it in this bucket instead. And since that cost hovered around 7,000, this is where we landed at 6. It was kind of a middle mark between 10 and 4, obviously. So that was kind of our jumping off point.
Is there a standard in the metro area of Des Moines, West Des Moines, and so forth? Are they all doing sign-on bonuses there?
Carlisle's doing 10, Bettendorf's doing 10. I don't know how you pronounce that. I'm still learning. Oldwine is 6. Oski is 5. Urbandale's 5. Marion County is 5. Boone is 5. Decorah 5. And Benton County is 4. Those were just some that we surveyed here and around the area.
Calvin, to answer your question, most of the metro, the Des Moines and West Des Moines and Ankeny PDs, those are the places that are taking most of the certified officers because their pay is much greater than most of the other places. So they're not necessarily enticing a certified officer with a $4,000 or $5,000 sign-on bonus. It's more of the $80,000 to $90,000 to $100,000 3-year on the force top-out pay.
They'd rather have us train them than they take them.
Yes, that is exactly their honor. Yes.
Well, I think what you hear is the chief come up with a proposal, get support from this group, whatever it is.
The
council's consideration. Now, one of the things that we are looking to do is begin an improvement process. So we had some flexibility to establish that. What we're hearing is 6, but if we had to go what we felt a little bit higher, council would be okay with that. We could start off with offering this incentive bonus with this current improvement that we're hoping to send out within a week. The formal action that council would have on this was typically we amend the city personnel manuals, personnel policy on an annual basis when we talk the wage scale on it. This would be considered a formal amendment as part of that. So that's where the official action would be. But we'd like that permission to be in to offer this with this new improvement process. We're hoping to initiate within the next 7 days.
And given the current atmosphere of very, very low unemployment, I think we owe all our departments to support them, whatever they need to do to hire good people. Our citizens deserve no less than good folks out there taking care of their needs.
A little bit of a tangent. Is there a connection, remind me, with the Career Academy for the schools to interest homegrown talent to stay?
For specifically law enforcement?
Yeah.
No. Right? I mean, there's a...
Yeah, we had a career academy class that we taught for several years, and we...
Just the class, though, not
Yes,
a
yeah,
program
not
that kind of feeds it.
not a specific program, yeah.
And we'll be starting that up again. I'll be teaching a class out at Pella Community Schools, criminal justice, but it's just a course, it's not a whole program.
A good portion of homegrown kids like to stay. They can do it without the bonus.
I think Hunter Borchi is a prime example of that. He went through every step that the community has. Am I right, Paul, on that?
Yes,
Yeah.
that is correct. Hunter came up through the Pella High School, took the Career Academy class, and then became a reserve officer, and then got hired right after he got done with college by us.
Okay, anything else? Thank you. Next item that we have up is the discussion on proposing decent exposure draft ordinance. For those following at home, I'm on slide 43 this evening, and background on this, what the purpose of this ordinance is intended to regulate body parts that are not currently covered as far as it relates to indecent exposure, that are currently not covered under the current state law. Generally speaking, when we talk about laws, nudity laws in the state of Iowa, they generally pertain to pubic and genital areas. And this ordinance that we're discussing regulates body parts of the buttocks and nipples and female breasts on this. Now, when we discussed this item initially on April 5th, there was some discussion or request by council to consider a potential exemption when we talk about indecent exposure for these particular body parts. When it occurs as far as routine usage in the locker room or restroom area. So what we've done is we've added to the existing ordinance that we're considering this evening, section F, that specifically states when the conduct occurs in the routine use of restrooms, locker rooms, and so on facilities. And this ordinance is decided was drafted by the city attorney. So before proceeding or proposing this on a formal vote, we wanted to make sure that council was agreeable to this added exemption, and then also if there was any additional concerns or research that we need to do before it's considered for a formal vote as an ordinance under the city of Pella, we wanted to make sure that we address those questions. So, Chief McShady, is there anything additional to add on this?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it is like Mike said. That's the attorney's crafting of this. That's the only thing they added. I think that was the only concern at the end of the night that the council had. So.
I'm still struggling a little bit with any part of the buttocks.
Yeah. So if you remember, last time I addressed this, we talked about intent.
Yeah.
And so it's different if for lack of better words, you might bend over and have some plumber's crack or something, right? But if we look at the intent and the true meaning of that word, it's going to be someone who's purposely, intentionally disrobing for that action. And so I feel confident that, and our staff have talked about that actually quite extensively more than I really cared to be honest with you.
I know, I wanna like clean it up.
But I also feel comfortable that my staff makes good decisions and can reason out what that intent was versus, something that was an accident or maybe just a poor clothing choice, whatever that poor clothing choice is. So I think you can get real deep in the weeds on that as well. So, but at the end of the day, it's going to be the council's decision for sure.
I kind of fall in line with Liz, other than somebody in the mall, I find that Lennox thing to be unenforceable, basically. That's not trying to be a tough guy or anything, it's just,
Right.
how do you do that?
Yes, exactly.
Well,
I don't know how you get around that.
that's the charm. So this is the example I give. If someone were to disrobe and run away from you, I think clearly the intent is, and so if you push that into the language as it's represented there, there's clear intent there. Versus someone who just wears a skimpy pair of shorts. I think we could agree that there's no intent there. So.
Okay?
I like the addition of the public restrooms, I don't know if that was nice.
So I think the way you described the chief would kind of take care of the, shall we say, the wardrobe malfunction also, does not.
Yeah.
We can figure that out.
Yes.
I'm the only one supposed to speak. I'm just curious about this, because the only complaints I've ever heard from guards is about people that. It's in there,
It's in
excluded. Oh, okay.
Okay. I would say bring it back for.
Thank you. Okay, the last item that we have on the docket tonight is continuing discussion on the federal temporary design grant waiver. This is really a continuation discussion that we had on February 1st. And to bring members of the audience and those following at home, I'm on slide 44, 5 for the members at home that were following. We talked about on February 1st that we received requests from vendors, food vendors that operate temporarily during the summer months. And one of the items that I can tell you from a personal basis that's always a struggle is design standards for temporary food stands on this as well. And so to frame the discussion and the context of the discussion that we had on February 1st is really establishing on a trial basis a segment of town where if we were to look at loosening the standards or actually not having design standards for food vendors, it would be worth a trial period of time. And so on February 1st, what we talked about was identifying the Oskaloosa Street corridor as an area that we would have a trial basis for food vendors. And so let me make it very clear. The food vendors would still have to receive a peddler's permit, but the second component, when you look at their stand on there, I believe after 30 days, they have to have a design review permit that has to have a Dutch theme or a Dutch architecture. That would be waived. And so when we look at the draft ordinance that we have, let's first start off with the geographical area of the proposed ordinance. Where this would be at, it would be on the Oskaloosa Street corridor that we talked about. We start at the intersection of Oskaloosa Street and Main Street and extend to the intersection of Oskaloosa and Southeast 16th Street. So it's this area that's listed up here on the big board. Every area that you see in kind of this green area, peddlers can operate in what's called community commercial zoning districts. If you hear the terminology CC, that's the area that we're talking about. So with this draft ordinance, what this excludes is from the period of June of this year through December 31st, it would exclude peddlers from obtaining the design permit if you operate in the Oskaloosa Street corridor. So it would be for properties that abut Oskaloosa Street that are in the green shaded areas. That's where peddlers would be. If they operated in those areas, they would not have to receive a design review permit through CDC. And so this would be a trial period. It would be through the end of this year. And what our intention would be is at the end of the year, we'd have another policy planning session, and we talk about from a staff standpoint if there's any issues with the program and if it should be extended, in this quarter, but not only in this quarter, but other areas of town as well. So it's really intended to be a trial period that we're looking at with this test ordinance that we have. And so, once again, as it is written, design peddlers would not receive a design permit, be required to receive a design permit if they operate in the Oskaloosa Street corridor, that's defined from Oskaloosa Street time period that this exemption would apply to tentatively is June 1st through December 31st of this year. We feel that would be an ample time period to report back to council the findings on the program and to see if there should be any adjustments. Now, in full disclosure, I will say this, but I'm not looking to complicate the matter. CDC has discussed this item, and they do have some, I would characterize as long-term suggestions on this as well, and that's really kind of a separate discussion. But if we're going to have the long-term discussions, one of the things I think would be very beneficial is to have a test run in an area of the city to see how it works as well. So you got two tracks that are going on here. We're talking about simply the test run portion of this was what council discussed on February 1st. And CDC also has specific recommendations on long-term issues concerning peddlers and design permits that we intend to bring back as part of the discussion when we talk about potential long-term adjustments to the city code. So with that, Mr. Mayor, what we're really looking for is this test period up here from June 1st to December 31st on the Oskaloosa Street corridor. That's the way the ordinance is written. This would be the test period. At conclusion of the test period, we would report back on another policy and planning session. And at that time, we'd also consider the recommendations by CDC as it relates to peddlers as well. So that's our presentation this evening. If you want to have me answer any questions the mayor and council may have on this item.
So assuming you get direction from us, when will the formal ordinance, then the former temporary ordinance, how quick would we be able to pull that together?
Well, you know, as far as I personally think, the peddler season is the summer season and the fall season. We could certainly come back before December 1st of this year. CDC's already given their recommendations on long-term solutions. So if council wanted to have this discussion late fall, we'd certainly be in a position to feel that we could be prepared to discuss this issue if we have a good solid period of time with our test period on the Oskaloosa Street corridor. We had CDC's recommendations on that. And that would probably be the earliest late fall on the item.
I think trial run's a great idea. The real foundational issue here going forward, changes in Oskaloosa Street, is that an extension of the central business district, or is that a road itself? I don't have a great position on that, it's kind of which way people want to look.
I think that, we do have Scott News here, and he, on the Oskaloosa Street corridor, we really have a need for, we have a large food insecurity district, we have our major industries, and people needing to get fed quickly, and not having the amount of time necessary to go to the west side or to go downtown and get something to eat. And we're seeing an overwhelming response. Scott, you could probably speak to that, not meaning to put you on the spot, but I think I just
I
put you
can
on the
speak
spot.
to it. When we went there, they were out of food.
Gotta get there
That's my
early.
point. Is the line starts early and it ends early, because he can tell you the amount of food he goes through.
I doubled it from the time that I did Taco Tuesday last time, and this time I didn't sell out, but I didn't see you.
I wasn't there on Tuesday. I think if I remember right, our last discussion, that there was a lot of support for food trucks.
Yeah.
I think it was pretty unanimous to the trial run would be a good thing to see.
So what would be a success of the test and what would be a failure of the test, I guess, to be a little more clear to this trial run of 6 months? Is it, I won't offer any answers, I'm curious. Buttocks probably should have nothing to do with it.
I'll just throw out a few observations now. It's at the end of the night, so I may be a little bit on the glass half empty side of things. And let's talk about success. There's overwhelming positive comments by the community on the vendors and the increased food options in the community. Council would be for probably the people that would receive those kinds of comments. And on the glass half empty side of things that typically make their way to city staff, as well as the city council, if we had concerns about food vendors competing with local businesses that perhaps establish brick and mortar pay property taxes within the community, it was viewed as an unfair advantage circumstance that was brought to everyone's attention, that could definitely be an area of concern that council would want to address as well. So I guess, you know, to summarize from my standpoint, I'm going to kick this back to Jerry and Mandy because they each deal with it. But it'd be the positive comments from the increased availability of vendors on Oskaloosa Street. Likewise, there could be comments or concerns suggested by local businesses that view themselves in competition with vendors as well. So, Mandy?
Yeah, I can give an example of one. We had an inquiry for a peddler permit last year that was a bright pink building. And they looked at the Dutch design standards and said, there's no way we can meet that, so it didn't go any further. So there are a lot of out there ideas from a design perspective that we may see, we may not. So that's one that we do get a lot of requests that then once they see the Dutch design, it maybe changes their thought process on if they want to operate here or not.
So is this something that, maybe Lynn, this is in your district or ward, that you would want to almost say, hey, we're trialing something. What's the donut guy, or get here, try this out this summer, and I don't know, put a thing together to try to get something going there. And the more, the larger your sample size, the better your test results are going to be.
I agree, and I think too, it isn't that anybody can just swap anything anywhere. There's a lot of paperwork they have to go through. The state comes in before they can serve. I mean, it's not just like, if somebody wakes up and says, I'm going to serve donuts on the Oskaloosa corridor tomorrow. I mean, it's tedious at times, and they have to go through background checks, and fingerprints are supplied. So, we have a pretty strenuous process just to get them in. And so to answer your question, yes, I think that we do need to test this, and we need to try it, and that we know now that there's a need and a desire. And, so far Scott's been kind of our guinea pig, and sorry, but
It's all good.
it's just, it's been overwhelmingly successful. It really has. So, and also with our planned park at the, in front of the Pella Court, there's a whole area in this park that's dedicated solely to food trucks. So before we build this wonderful park, let's test drive this first. See what the need is, see what's popular, and then when we build the park, we'll have done our homework.
Hey, Scott, is there a community of folks just like you that do good work that you might be able to drum up a little?
I'm on the Iowa Barbecue Society, and there is, just as much as you guys are wanting to know the information and people are asking the questions, there's a full amount of individuals that are asking me the questions. I get emails time to time of how the progress is, and by far they knew, a lot of guys knew before me because they were in the industry in Iowa, but they also knew Pella's a tough cookie to crack.
Yeah.
And so right now, there's a big bet on, is he gonna get in, is he gonna get it going, how's it going? Right now, I'm winning that bet.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's the idea of, it's hard to come into a town that doesn't want the food truck, the diversity in town. And right now, that's the argument of why. Why can't you come in? Why can't you do this? I've had people tell me they'll build me a Dutch front. Sorry, it ain't happening. I just want to bring food diversity here. I don't want to compete with any other business that, thinks that I'm taking away from this or that. I'm offering a different food than anyone else in town. So why can't that just be?
I'd suggest get this 6 month a really good test in your network, and let's have you win the bet.
I'm all about it.
Then you can buy me lunch.
That'll work.
That's a good goal. If I show my butt off now,
that'll be fine.
That fix it?
Okay.
Okay. Anything else with this? All right, thank you. We got a lot done tonight, so I will entertain a motion to adjourn. So moved. Answer is 4. All in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Names, please call roll.
Banstra.
Yes.
Spore.
Yes.
DeYoung. Vanderhorst. Carlstone.
Yes.
Hopkins.
Yes.
Motion passed. We are.